All right, welcome everyone. We got a great crowd here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me click play on my screen. And just really glad everyone could join us. We've got what I'll call a special European edition of the Client Success webinar series. We have one of our first repeat guests with Rav Dhaliwal from Crane Ventures joining us. Rav, can you hear me okay? There he is.
Great to see you.
Very good. How are things in London? I'm gonna have to stop saying this morning. How are things this afternoon in London?
This afternoon in London, it is cold but bright.
Cold but bright. Well, you beat me. I've just got cold and dreary here in Utah. So, well, good. So if this is one of the first time you're joining one of our webinars, my name's Mark Stoddard. I run sales and marketing here for Client Success. And we've also got Dave Blake, CEO of Client Success. Dave, can you hear us all right? I think, Dave, you're on mute.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well wherever you're coming in. It's great to be back with you. And Happy New Year, I guess, a little bit belated.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Are we allowed to say New Year on the 28th? Maybe we can start leveraging Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. Maybe that's something we can do. So
that was the last time you'll hear it.
I think it's all right to say Happy New Year while you're still writing 2020 instead of 2021. You know, when you stop doing that, then you need to stop.
I am absolutely still writing 2020. It just won't leave me. So, well, very good. Would love to, looks like everybody in the chat pane, looks like we got a few folks chatting in. So would love to just kind of see where everybody is. We got some folks from Amsterdam. Looks like Dave Jackson's there. Dave, hey, how's it going, man? We got folks from Brazil, Atlanta. We've got a great crowd here. So, well, good. So we'll get things kicked off. So here's the game plan. So Rev has a really cool, important topic he's going to share with us around the quote, everything department. He'll give us an intro into the concept. And then really what we're going to do is we're going to have more of I want to use the term fireside chat, but I don't know if that works in a virtual setting. I don't know what the right term is, but we're going to have more of a chat between the three of us. We're going to be recording the session. We'll share the recording, the slides afterwards, but really, I mean, if anything, we'd love to have an interactive session. So please pop any questions you have in the chat pane. We'll use them to help run the discussion. And I think that's the game plan. So before we jump in, I just want to share one quick thing. I see on the registration list, there's a lot of new names that I haven't seen on other sessions, which is awesome. I love seeing that. And that tells me there's a lot of you that perhaps are new to Client Success. You're not familiar with us. So I'd love to give you a brief intro into who we are, what we're all about. And so basically think of us as the easiest to use, easiest to implement, complete customer success solution that you're going to find on the market. We're going to help your CSMs with all things related to customer success, whether that's onboarding, adoption, renewals, growth. Think of it as anything your CSMs need to provide a great customer experience. That's the type of thing we help with. We'll take everything from your customer success platform and enable you to roll up insights to your leadership team, collaborate internally. Of course, with everything moving toward the goal that we're all working toward of better retention, better growth. And for us, always with the focus on ease of use, usability, fast time to value. You'll see here on the slide, we're a leader on G2. We won the 2020 Cody Award for the best customer success solution on the market. And speaking of G2, I always like to mention that almost half of our G2 reviews, and these are, if you're not familiar with G2, these are reviews directly from customers that are using us day in and day out. Almost half of our reviews talk about how easy we are to use, how easy we are to get up and running. One example, Fran B, one of our customers, she says on G2, I love how easy it is to use Client Success, how simple the layout is. It doesn't take very long to get new starters up to speed. And this is so important when, adoption is so much easier when the product's not overly complicated. So perhaps if you're using other platforms out there, you're tired of, let's call it complicated systems that take forever to roll out, come talk with us. We'd love to tell you a little bit more about Client Success, see how we could help you get up and running. I know a lot of you are kind of reevaluating your technology spend, of course, as we're in the first month of the year. Love to chat with you. You can find us on clientsuccess.com. You can shoot me a note directly. I'm Mark with a K at Client Success. and would love to get you routed and chat with anybody that wants to learn a little bit more. So, well, good. So I'm going to switch gears here. And I think, Rav, we're going to switch it over to you and have you share your screen. So let me hit pause on mine and let you pull up slides on your side.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Let's see here. Right, hopefully you can all see my screen share.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, it's perfect.
Wonderful. Well, firstly, guys, thank you so much for inviting me back again. I think it was last summer when we did our first webinar, and thank you.
It feels like it was last summer, but 12 years ago. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Time is playing funny tricks on all of us. And thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. As Mark mentioned, my name is Rav Dhaliwal. A little bit about me. I'm a former software executive. Sometimes I describe myself as a recovering software executive. I currently run an advisory business focused on working with venture capital and growth equity firms. I'm a partner in a number of firms and an investor myself. And for anyone who'd like to connect either on Twitter or on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. You're very welcome to. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is this idea of the everything department. And in order to understand what I mean by that, I want to go on just a very quick journey on the typical path startups. And when I say startups, we're really talking about software and enterprise software startups go on as they scale. So if we look at sort of a stage that a startup goes on and what it kinds of focus on, the earlier stage is what's called getting to product market fit. Some of you may have heard this term. It's a very common VC bandied around term. But really what this is as a company, you're building product, you have some hypotheses about what value that product drives. And what you're trying to do is validate those hypotheses as quickly as you can, right? So you're trying to find out who's our ideal buyer, what are the indicators of how the product's being used that show some kind of success or value is being generated. Now, eventually, you'll hopefully get to close to or get to product market fit, at least for one segment or maybe more of customers. And that allows you to do what's called getting to go to market fit. And this is really about cranking up your sales, marketing, commercial engine, because now you have a product that you know adds value, you know who it adds value to. So let's accelerate and amplify that. And let's be able to consistently, repeatedly position, articulate, and sell our product. And then once you get into that kind of motion is when you really put your foot on the gas and you start to scale, right? Now, for most people, scaling is really about, their thought about scaling is, that means we're going to add more people to the business. We're going to hire more salespeople and hire more engineers. And that's true. But one of the often overlooked things about scaling is that the pace and frequency at which you're doing everything suddenly increases and the complexity increases. So you are now starting to deal with lots of different segments of customers, and those customers have very different needs. And you start to come on board and meet the needs that either previously hadn't occurred before, or that they're not met by anyone in the organization because nobody owns them, because these problems had never turned up before. So if you look at this kind of simple formula of we're doing everything faster now, it's more complex, and we're hitting lots of customer needs that we never anticipated or don't have an organizational owner, this is really problematic. So it's problematic because it's going to stop us from growing. So the solution to this problem is pretty obvious. We'll get to that in a minute, but some of the signs that you have some of these unmet or anticipated needs are that actually, once you've sold your software, deploying it or getting the customer up and running takes a very, very long time, or it doesn't happen at all. That's a key sign. Another one is you may end up doing pretty well deploying the solution, but getting your customer to actually use it or adopt the product is a challenge. Sometimes you can deploy well, you can even get people onboarded and using the product, but they're not using it in a very sophisticated way. So what's called the proficiency of how they're using the product's very basic, and that leads to challenges in justifying the cost because they're not using the product in the best possible way and therefore not seeing the full value. Other signs can be you're doing okay, but you got no one advocating for you. So none of your existing customers are referring you to other people, or they're not doing case studies or references. And one of the most dangerous signs of these unmet or anticipated needs is you're not confident about renewals, or you're losing renewals, and you're not growing your customer base, your install base, as much as you should be. And so if you're having one or more of these problems, especially as a founder or as a leadership team, the solution is pretty obvious. We'll build a customer success function that will solve all of these problems, right? And the instinct to do that is a really good one. But if your instinct to build a success function is purely out of reaction to these unmet or unanticipated needs, that can contain a whole load of hidden problems that will come back and bite you. So the first problem is you encounter what I call the go-to-market production line. And I'm going to talk about this in a bit of detail because it really brings to fore this idea of the everything department. The way we organize companies, even modern SaaS high-tech companies, is still very much the way we organize companies back in the industrial era. We have a production line. So in our case, we have product engineering, we have demand generation, marketing, SDRs, BDRs, sales, and then we close the deal, right? And so we optimize our companies for this production line. And then at the end of that production line, we think, oh, well, we've got these unmet and anticipated needs. We need someone to deal with that. We'll create a CS function. And CS is at the end of the production line. So if we were to think about this as a car production line, what we're basically saying is to the CS team, we've built this car and now we need you to check that it meets the customer's specification. We need you to make sure that the car gets delivered to them on time. You need to teach them how to drive the car because our car is slightly different from everybody else's or a car they may have driven before. Oh, and by the way, any product defects or manufacturing defects that happen further back in the production line, we need you to take care of those too, please. And then could you, while you're doing that, could you convince them to buy some add-on features to the car, maybe leather seats or a reversing camera, and somehow convince them to come back next year and buy another car? And so what you've done there is you've created a department that owns everything that either didn't fit or wasn't wanted elsewhere in the organization. And that's what we mean by the everything department. Now, the danger of this is a good CS team will work really, really hard to find creative, manual, often laborious workarounds to solve these problems. And that would actually has the reverse effect of masking problems that may have happened further back in the production line from the people who could solve them. So you may have an issue in how you're selling and positioning. You may actually have some deficiencies in the product. And these are getting masked through all the good work that the CS team is doing. So if you think you might be in an everything department, here's a brief checklist on some things that you may want to ask yourself to assess. And then after Dave and I have the conversation, I'm sure the conversation will go into how we can diagnose and maybe avoid or fix an everything department. The first thing to do is ask yourself, does your customer success function have a very crisp definition of how it's adding value, right? Now, the reason for needing this is there is no real industry standard definition for customer success. And that's because it's contextual between every business and its product. But if you can't articulate in very crisp terms, here's the value that we're adding, you may have an everything department. Do you have targets that you are aiming for that are materially important to your company? Doesn't necessarily mean they're revenue targets, although that is ideal. But if you're an early stage company trying to get to product market fit, then really time to value and shortening that is a materially important thing. Do you have a target around reducing time to value, for example? Do you have all the data that you need, both from the product and from other sources, that helps you to make decisions proactively? Do you have a good alignment with sales? Or do you have a hard handover? Does a ticket suddenly appear saying, hey, we've closed the deal. Off you go, here's the customer, go and do some magic? And do you have a feedback mechanism, a formalized, recognized one with the product organization to help them continuously iterate on product market fit? So that's the idea of the everything department. Those are some questions that you can ask yourself to see if you have one. And so now over to Dave and Mark to see if we can get to the bottom of this and maybe solve this problem for a few people.
I'd love for you to keep this slide up there and let it hang out there for a minute. And I'd just love to hear in the chat how many people have, at least one of the issues that are here on the slide. I'd just love to see kind of what people think. Maybe give me a +1, give me a yes. I got absolutely yes. I've got yes, yes, yes. So, I mean,
there is a prize if you have all 6.
We're on to something, right?
Yeah, it's going crazy right now.
Okay.
Maybe the best way to go is almost ask the opposite question. Is there anybody out here who doesn't have this issue? But yeah, I got +6 from Nick. So, well, very good. No, I mean, just a ton of, fascinating things that I think we can dig into. And so, yeah, let's switch more over to kind of like discussion. And so if anybody has any questions based on any of the topics that Rav's talked about, or anything that we're going to talk about here as we kind of move into the discussion, pop them in the chat pane. I've got the chat pane and the Q&A kind of pulled up on my other screen. So please put any questions that you have there. And, one of the first questions.
Leave the slide up, Mark. Sorry, do you want to leave the slide up?
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Okay.
For at least the next little bit. So, maybe my first question is, and this is especially relevant, I think, for most kind of early stage companies, is it comes down to like they have the production line, the traditional production line that you talked about earlier, where they've got marketing, sales, product, etc. And they're trying to figure out, what the heck is this customer success thing? And so the fact of the matter is their executive team just frankly doesn't quote unquote get customer success. I remember last year, our team did a state of customer success survey where we surveyed probably about 500 or 1,000 customer success professionals. And we just asked the question, does your CEO quote unquote get customer success? And about 2/3 of them said, yeah, but that left 1/3 of, SaaS CEOs, their executive team says, that my CEO doesn't really get customer success. So, a lot of people would say, my executive team doesn't get customer success. We've ended up creating an everything department. We hit, 3 or 4 of these bullet points. So, what's your advice on, educating or getting executive buy-in to starting to change their mindset so we can start to solve some of these questions?
The $64 million question,
right?
I think. Yeah. So I don't profess, and Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I don't profess to have a single silver bullet answer. But what I can tell you is this first bullet here about definition of how you're adding value. I think that's probably the key one, because if I don't understand something, it's probably because I don't have a definition of it. Everybody, no matter what their background, if I'm a technical founder who's come out of a lab and just built product, even I know what sales is without being told, right? Sales is I get on the phone and ask strangers for money. I understand that, right? They're going to have some vague idea of what marketing is. I do stuff in public and then I try to get customers to come to me. So if you don't have even that broadest awareness, or if people explain it to you in very vague terms, well, we focus on driving outcomes, or we are a strategic partner or influencer to the customer, it's very hard in those broad terms to actually understand what that function does, right? Now, I think it's much better to be very, very reductive and say, here is the skill set that we bring that helps the customer see value, and here is how we measure whether that skill set's successful. For example, we are Acme's change management and digital adoption team, and we drive net revenue retention, right? That is reasonably straightforward definition for Acme, right? Now, it's easier said than done to find your definition, especially if you're an everything department, but that's probably where I would concentrate first. Can you get a crisp definition of the value you add to the customer? I bring digital change management to the customer, and to my own company, I drive net revenue retention. If you can do that, I think you've got a better shot at reorienting the way that your management thinks.
Dave, what do you think?
I'll jump in. First, I got to back up and say how excited I am to share the Zoom with Rav. Rav, he is one of the premier leaders in the world, and so it's a treat to be here with you, Rav.
I should just point out, Dave, I'm English, and as being English, we don't know how to deal with compliments, so I would just say thank you.
Oh, well, I'll just throw it out there. Everybody, you're lucky to have him, as you can see, and I'm grateful to be here. Yeah, I agree. I would say one quick statement. It's hard to be who you aspire to be if you don't have a clear definition of who you are. And we did a simple poll on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and we asked customer success teams, if you have a definition, have you defined it? Do you have a mission statement? Do you have a why, which Rav has talked about here? And 48% of the customer success teams, or the respondents, said they don't have a mission statement or a clear definition of their department. So I think it starts there. If you're able to clearly articulate who you are and what your role is, then the next step is, I do that with my CEO. I do that with all of my peers internally. I do that with my customers. And once you have that foundation set, it's so much easier to avoid becoming the everything department, because you have a clear definition of what your role is. Everybody starts to align with that role. So I'd say that's a key thing.
And I would just add on that, Dave, it's a little bit of a catch-22, because if you don't have the definition and then someone in the organization says, we've got this thing here that customers need and it doesn't really fit anywhere, so we're going to give it to you, you then don't have any real way to push back on that, because you've got no definition of what you do. If you say, well, actually, we're a digital change management practice, can you tell me how this thing you want me to do drives digital change management? You have pushed that back to them in a very gentle way, because you have a very clear definition of what you are doing. So I think it's important, not just for educating your leadership and the broader organization. It's the right vehicle for pushing back and not owning the things that don't fit anywhere else.
And everybody else on the earlier slide you had, so all those other teams, they all have clear definitions. Nobody would ever go to a VP of sales and say, hey, can you go build this thing that we're going to fit into our product and that'll do these 10 things? Like, nobody would do that, because everybody knows this is what the sales team is responsible for. Nobody would go to the marketing team and ask them, hey, can you actually get on the phone with all of our customers and sell them and close them and do all that? Like, because there's clear definitions of what those teams do, but you're all exactly right. You talk to 5 different companies, you're going to get very different definitions of what the customer success function does in that business.
And I think that's right, that the definition will be different, because the other problem is, if you try to take a playbook of customer success from one company and apply it to another one, this is something senior execs often do. I'll move from my big company to the small company and take the same playbook. That very rarely works either, because it is contextual. But really what I'm suggesting is spend the time to figure out the context of your company. Whatever your definition is, ultimately what you are doing, regardless of what company you're in or what product you're in, is you're trying to speed up the time it takes for your customer to get value from your product, so you can sell them more product.
Why do you
That's really what you're trying to do,
Rav? Like, because if I'm a sales leader or a marketing leader or a product leader, and I go from company A to company B, I don't know if my mission necessarily changes, but it feels like if I'm in customer success at company A and I move to company B, it could change. Why do you think that's different for customer success?
So what's interesting is people often refer to salespeople as being coin operated, and I think that is a pejorative. What they are is outcome oriented. So they optimize for the outcomes they need in order to drive their short-term number, because they're measured on a 12-week cycle as opposed to a 52-week cycle, right? Yeah. So there is a lot to be learned from how they organize. They have a definition, a clear definition. What do you do, Mr. Salesperson? Well, I drive ACV. That's my job, all right? How do you do that? Well, I have a target every 12 weeks. I optimize for this number. I work back from the number to work out how many calls do I have to make? How many prospects do I have to convert? What skills do I need? What am I going to prioritize? Blah, blah, blah. So, there is a lot to be learned from that way that those teams operate. But sales is unique because if you think about sales, there's a science and an art.
Sure.
Customer success is the same. There's a science to success and there's an art. The science in sales, 60% of that science is the same everywhere, right? I have to have pipeline. I have to generate 3 to 4x of the pipeline to hit my number. I have to have a weekly forecasting. The mechanics are the same. A good leader knows how to put that in quickly and then figure out the art, right? And so what happens is, if you're on the success side and you're an everything department, you haven't got the time to figure out either the science or the art, because all you're doing is reacting, because you're just owning the stuff that's just cropping up. The science I would say is where people like ClientSuccess really help is we will give you tooling and a framework to think about how to build the science of your CS function. The value that you add is the art. If you are too busy firefighting or just owning stuff that you shouldn't be doing, or you shouldn't be owning, you might get some way of building the science. You might buy a great tool like ClientSuccess, build success plans, build QBR decks, build a customer journey, but you have neglected the art because you just haven't got the time to figure out, well, actually, the core thing that moves the needle with customers is when we bring this level of skill or we run this kind of engagement.
Got it.
And I think that's why it's different. So over the years, as success has got more established as a profession, the science of it is starting to get more structured and more understood like sales is. Sales is, they've just been going at it for longer.
Sure.
But what I'm really saying is the definition is the art. That
makes sense. So speaking of definitions, there's several questions in the chat of related to definitions. And I think there's three that kind of came in right about the same time of, and I think this is pretty common in earlier stage startups is the definition, the difference between success and customer support. And so we've got 3 or 4 questions on that. Curious what your guys' thoughts are on, how do I communicate to my leadership team the core difference between a customer success team and a customer support team? Because I think a lot of people, especially with a traditional mindset, that we've known what support is for years.
Yeah.
So how do you think about communicating that?
I'm happy to just kick off there, Dave, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think the simplest way is to say one is proactive, one is reactive.
Okay.
So customer support is waiting for something to happen and they work on tickets. Customer success is proactive. They are driving activity with the customer and they aren't waiting to react to what's going on with the customer. They are pushing proactive. That's at the very reductive level how I would start that conversation. But keen to hear, Dave, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. I think that support is much more transactional. I've got a problem and I solve it. And customer success is much more long-term relationship driven and proactive in that nature. I think they also have a little bit different DNA, and I think definitely I think sometimes people try to combine those teams, and the measurements, the objectives, the DNA, and the missions for those 2 teams are very, very different. And so I always recommend keep them very separate, hire the right DNA and skill set, and have very clear missions for both.
Yeah, optimize for the skill that you need. Yeah.
And then communicate the differences internally and externally. So a lot of times, I believe sometimes the CSMs, we get in our own way in that sense that we're pleasers. We love to solve problems as well. But if I'm taking every a question that comes in that should be directed to support, that's where I slowly become reactive, and I can't do the proactive strategic things because I'm trying to take on everything that the customer brings to me. So I think that's a critical thing that we as CSMs need to understand is the importance of redirecting or having very warm handoff back to the organization who should own that topic.
So Dave, that's a really key point because it goes back to something I talked about a couple of slides back, was if you can mask issues from the rest of the organization by trying to be helpful. Yeah. So the instinct is good. I want to service a customer, I want to help them quickly. I can help them with X. But what you may end up doing is if you are actually doing things which should be a support ticket and should be recorded and reported on because you're just taking care of them before that point. Now, great instinct, and I'm helping my customer. One, you're creating bad habits in the customer because in the middle of the night when they have a problem, they won't know what to do because you're not there. Yep. Second is there's a whole bunch of data about, wow, we get 500 tickets a week about this problem that is not being surfaced anymore because you're stopping it getting to that point. So sometimes being helpful counterfactually is not the right thing to do. Exactly. It actually creates more organizational strife than it solves.
And it's one of those hard things because it always comes back to that, like, what is it? The urgent and important diagram. Like it always feels like the ticket coming in is super urgent because it's the customer, they're asking for it right now. But like you say, Rav, like sometimes solving that ticket right now is not the most important thing I can do for the business.
Sometimes the most important thing I can do for the business is focus on all the proactive things that I need to be doing as a customer success executive.
Exactly.
And
I'm sure there are people on the call who are going, yeah, but the problem is like we don't have a very good support team, or they're really slow, so I have to do it. And I'm like,
keep
there
going
you
on
go.
that.
Just answered the question. You've hidden an organizational problem from the rest of the organization, right? So that is the push-pull. I've always said when I ran teams and when I built teams, I used to say to my team, a big part of your role is to coach the customer into being a good customer, right? We have to coach them to be a good customer. So, hey, I know it's a pain, but I'm going to need you to log a ticket for this, or I'm going to need you to do X, Y, Z, rather than say, actually, my job is to just spoon feed and take all of this stuff off them, because that's another way you end up becoming an everything department.
Yeah, I found over my
you're going to get better help from my technical team. Like it's not that I'm pushing you to somebody else and I'm, like a telecom, just, passing you off. No, you're actually going to get a better answer by calling that team. And,
the best phrase I've ever learned is, unfortunately, I'm not best placed to help you with this, but let me get you to the people who are.
Yep.
Yeah, I found that customers don't care who solves their problem as long as it's solved in a satisfactory way.
Yeah.
And so the key thing is if you find that you don't trust your support team to solve the problem in a satisfactory way for your customer, don't continue to take it on. Go to your support team, bring the data and the insights, and work collaboratively with the support team to raise the experience and improve the shortcomings on that side. And then both teams will be that much stronger.
Yeah, it's hard though, isn't it, Dave? It's kind of almost antithetical to the DNA of really good success people. Is like, I can't let them fall into a hole. That's not my job. But sometimes, it's a little bit. I'll use the analogy of sometimes you need to let your kid touch the hot radiator so they know not to do it again.
Yeah, and I found that it's a maturity of the role. As a CSM matures, they start realizing that I can get farther by leveraging resources and ensuring that my customer's leveraging the right resources. And so a lot of times early on, they'll want to take everything, and then they'll start to say, oh no, I can leverage my support team. I can leverage my executives, and you start leveraging.
I agree completely. I should just point out, I'm not advocating letting your children burn themselves.
Exactly.
I'm not advocating.
A lot of times you hear the term, like, to use an American football analogy, like there's a lot of people in the business that should just be the quarterback. I'm not necessarily the one doing everything, but I'm kind of facilitating everybody else. And
or traffic cop. That's another good analogy. Right?
That's a good one too, because I'm not necessarily the one who should be solving your ticket, but it still is my responsibility, because in customer success, I do own the relationship. It is my responsibility to make sure that things get followed up on in a timely manner, that if, we do have a ticket that's sitting outstanding for an unreasonable period of time, I should be pinging the support team. And, so there's kind of the traffic cop quarterback analogy that I think is particularly relevant here.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense, because that again is part of the trap that you could end up into becoming this everything department. It's a very subtle distinction between accountability for something and responsibility for something. Yeah. So I can be responsible for the long-term health of a customer, accountable for, the long-term health of a customer, but not be responsible for solving every single thing that happens with that customer. And that is the other byproduct of putting customer success at the end of that production line, is everyone else behind the production line goes, oh, they're accountable and responsible. Deliver the car, teach them how to drive the car, fix the defects. And if you buy into that and go, well, actually, I'm not only accountable and responsible, those structural issues, and every company has structural gaps, will never get surfaced, right? There's a second challenge there, and maybe a bit more controversially, is that in my experience, there's two types of CS leader as well. There's one side CS leader goes, yeah, I know it's an everything department. I am not going to fight any of these battles or push back, because really what I want to do is be here for 2 years and become chief customer officer somewhere, right? Then there is the other type of CS leader who goes, no, hang on a minute. We are actually masking a whole load of problems and not adding the value we should be. Let me go and do the internal change management work, and occasionally have the odd argument with people to actually fix all this stuff. That is much harder, right? And so that is actually, I think, firstly, as practitioners, every CSM, it's incumbent on them to, be across your data, point out where the problems are, and then try and assess what kind of leader you've got to see, are they actually going to then help us action this or prioritize this or not? Because that is another big variable in becoming an everything department.
And it's so interesting to me because for me, like you put up that slide with the different departments on the conveyor belt. And, you know, for a lot of us, the everything department, you know, the CS team kind of sits at the end of it. Now, to me, the flip side of that is customer success is in a unique perspective to actually provide feedback all the way through that. So that internal change management, you know, sponsor, you know, it actually does make a lot of sense for at least customer success, maybe not owning that, but definitely being in the room, because they see that they're the end recipient of, you know, somebody, you know, selling a bad deal or product, you know, feature needing to, you know, or a product feature that we need, or us marketing to the wrong group of customers. So to me, it's, I think there's a version of this slide that still absolutely needs to exist, because customer success still needs to be in a position where they can at least influence and provide feedback. And I think be more the latter example that you talked about, of somebody who can actually go in and talk to the other teams.
Exactly.
And
Well,
still push for change management where it's needed.
If you were to redraw this structure, it wouldn't be a linear horizontal line, it'd be a circle.
Sure.
Right? That's what it would be. It would be a circular motion. And the unique thing about CS in that motion is it not only focuses on making a customer successful, it is one of the best inputs to making all these other departments successful. Hey, product, I can tell you what you really need to build because this is what customers are telling us. I can tell you these features are not adding any value. You could save yourself a bunch of time by deprecating them.
Yeah.
Marketing, I can tell you that this is your ideal profile of buyer and user if you're going to be doing persona-based campaigns. Yeah. Sales, I can tell you that these are the use cases that actually add the most value to your prospects, right? If an organization was smart about how it aligned, both in terms of incentive structure and internal alignment, and CS was much better about positioning itself as a value add internally and externally with that crisp definition, you would start to see a bit of this sort of shift, I think. It's hard to push bottom up, but there's nothing stopping you from, as a CS person, looking at the pipeline, going to a salesperson in your territory and go, hey, tell me about your deal. I think I might be able to help you close it.
And one thing that I'm noticing, and this is, there's not a ton of companies that are doing this, but I think it's an interesting trend that I'm starting to pick up, is you talked about the idea of being a chief customer officer. And in most companies that have a VP of customer success or a chief customer officer, it's traditionally, that's the person that owns and is responsible for customer success. But I'm starting to see some companies have a chief customer officer that is much more responsible for the entire go-to-market funnel. And so you have one person or one team that's actually looking at the entire experience, so they can have much more of the discussions that you're talking about, where they see, okay, we're getting signals from our quote unquote success team that we're having issues here. And if I've got one person who's kind of looking at that entire, you know, flywheel as instead of just the funnel, you know, I might be in a better position to influence change. I want to switch gears a little bit. So one of the things, and we've gotten a bunch of questions, and go back to your last slide. I want to dig in on this second bullet point around materially important targets. There's a bunch of questions here around, you know, what should our CS team be responsible for? What should we focus on? I think part of the you know, that whole what's CS, the difference between CS and support, I think a lot of that comes down to, we haven't necessarily defined the targets for each. And so it's easy to merge those together. We've been getting a bunch of questions around that. So I would love to hear both of you kind of dig in on what are the most important targets, metrics, you know, things that a customer success team should be responsible for, not only tracking, but communicating back to the rest of the company.
Okay, well, if we go back to broadly, a definition of CS is we accelerate value for customers in our own business. The material target should be the latter, whatever is important to the company at the time.
Okay.
So if I'm in that early stage, I'm trying to work out product market fit. As a company, my whole mission in life is building the best product I can so I can try and sell it. So materially, what's important to the company is product related metrics.
Okay.
CS can have those. Maybe it's time to value. we just need to focus on reducing time to value, and we define value as the customer uses these 5 features and has this level of engagement, right?
Sure.
Later, as you've got that go-to-market motion being built and scaled, I can start to add, well, actually, what's really important for the company now is top of funnel. I need to get more prospects in. So maybe that's the point where we orient CS to say, well, hopefully you understand how to drive quick time to value by now. Let's kind of see a materially important thing is NPS, referenceability, case studies, etc., because we're building a brand and we want to do top of funnel. Let's say you get product market fit and you've built the commercial engine and growing it and you're on that scaling phase. Well, then the top line thing that's important to the company is revenue. So sales is new revenue, marketing is new revenue, you are net revenue retention. So for me, I think part of the challenge is CS organizations and leaders are always looking for one metric, but as a company goes through a journey, different metrics are of materially different importance. So just align with what's important to the company at the time.
Yeah, and I think there's a bunch of questions in the chat pane that I think that really helps with, because you've got the traditional questions of like, hey, should customer success own upsells and renewals? Well, I think your answer being more nuanced of, well, it kind of depends at which stage in the journey you are and what's the most important thing.
Yeah,
I think
and also what skill set, right? This is a common thing because that's a production line question. But renewals happens at the end of the production line, not at the beginning. Who's at the end of the production line? We should give it to them, right? But then, that's a whole different skill set.
Yeah. Sure. Dave, thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts here. I like what Rav said on this. One of the things that I believe is that customer success teams shouldn't be afraid to own a number. And I commonly hear, I'm interviewing for a leader now, and a lot of folks out there feel like that owning a number and that ruins your trusted advisor relationship status. And I personally disagree with that. I think they should be okay owning a number. And as far as like the key metric, I think, I've evolved my thoughts on that. And I'll share, I reached and got a book for disciplines of execution. I've got a strategy there, which says, take and look at your long-term objectives, which at the end of the day, customer success teams are really trying to drive net revenue retention. Retention and growth. If that's the goal, the challenge is that it's like, what are the activities that I need to be doing every day to ensure our customers are successful, which in turn meets that end goal. And so we're experimenting with looking at key metrics that are measuring those things along the journey, from onboarding to customer advocacy to usage and adoption, that we believe that has a high propensity to achieving the end goal, and trying to create comp plans and targets and KPIs and dashboards that align with that kind of strategy.
So Dave, when you guys are a bit further along that journey, it would be great to hear what you found and what you've discovered and the approach you've taken, because I've tried to do something similar in the past and had to do it all manually, with spreadsheets and timesheets and correlating effort to outcome. And it's useful, but my goodness, it was painful.
Well, I think this could be a whole nother webinar in itself.
Yeah, for sure.
The challenge is most CSMs are motivated by money. They're motivated by driving value for the customer and motivated by the relationship. And sometimes our comp plans are built all around money and delayed rewards. So I have to spend my whole year trying to get a renewal, and then I get the reward from my comp plan. Yeah. So we're trying to figure out, how do you reduce the time from activity and engagement, positive activity with your customer, and the reward, and have those to be a little bit more tangible and valuable.
Indicators, I guess.
And so that's kind of what we're looking at.
You raise a really interesting point there, Dave, which is this idea of levers, right? So, I'm philosophically of the view that if you work in a software company, it doesn't matter what role you're in sales. We're all in sales. Yeah. That's the reason we're here. We build a product, we have engineers because we need to sell it and we need to be in sales. But in order to drive sales, you can pull different levers. Yeah. Right? So one lever is the sales lever, the commercial lever. I go negotiate, I uncover problems, we talk to procurement, we do all those steps. The other lever is the value lever. How can I drive value in this customer's business, right? So, can I help them do something cheaper, faster, easier? Because that's another lever to drive sales. So that's why I think it's important, and why I mentioned earlier, there's a lot to be learned from how sales operate. I think the problem we have is that in most of our personal lives, our experience with salespeople in our personal lives is generally pretty poor, right? You know, we get cold emails and we get telephone people, and, you know, and it's created, unfortunately, a really bad view. But really good software salespeople, what they do is they deliver value, and the outcome of that value happens to be revenue, right? So there is nothing wrong with having that mindset of saying, I'm a success person, and what I do is drive business value for my customer, and the happy byproduct of that business value is more revenue.
That's
You're
right.
still in sales, you're just pulling a different lever.
Yeah, and I've always said CSMs are the best solution sellers out there.
For sure.
Deliver the solution, deliver the value, and the renewal will follow. Or the
And by the way,
expansion will follow.
I think it does a bit of a disservice to customers if you think that they don't think that you have a commercial goal.
Yeah.
Right? You know, they know that, right? They're not stupid. They know you're a commercial organization and you're going to want to try and get more money from us at some point, right? So I think it's a little bit of a disservice to say, well, if I hold a number, I think that really to me is much more, if I hold a number, I might be forced to do things I don't want to do. And I don't believe that's the case. I think that's why you need, actually, it goes back to that definition. The lever I am pulling to make this customer successful, to drive more revenue, is digital change management, or it's project management, or it's DevOps skill, or whatever it is. So, you know, I think it all kind of ties back to having a crisp definition.
And for me, it comes down to a lot of times, like, regardless of whether I own a number or whatever it is, what's my mindset going into that conversation? If my mindset going into that conversation is, I'm going to eke a few more dollars out of you, then yeah, regardless of owning a number or not, if my mindset is, well, I'm 100% going in here just to upsell, cross-sell, do something, then that's the situation where, quote unquote, owning a number could be, you know, seen as a problem. And I think that's where a lot of the mindset and a lot of the pushback is if you own a number, that's going to be your only mindset. But like you said a minute ago, Rav, like the best, whether it's a salesperson, a solutions consultant, whatever, the best people in those, let's just call them revenue producing roles, they're going to go in, they're going to focus on, how can I provide some value here? And if I do a really good job at providing and delivering value, then yeah, I'm going to hit the number. But the number's secondary. And
correct.
I think that's the thing where a lot of folks kind of miss the mark, is they think that if you own a number, you can't really focus on value. And I think that's wrong, frankly. And
I think the other advantages of having some material target, whether it's a time to value target or a net revenue retention target, whatever the target is, it really focuses the mind on doing things that actually productively drive value, right? It focuses the mind on looking at your everything department and going, you know, these 5 things, these are a drag and they don't actually add any value to the customer. So I need to prioritize finding these at home, getting them automated, handing them to someone who actually should own them. I took over a team once, I won't mention any names, and there was 110 different projects in flight when I took over the team, right? I'm like, how can there possibly be 110 projects? And you start to deconstruct it and you go, well, there's a whole bunch that because there's a gap in the product, so we shouldn't be doing these product projects. We should be working with product to solve that problem. There's a whole bunch here because no one wants to own this. We need to find these at home. There's a whole bunch here that can be automated. There's a whole bunch here we should never have even started. We could have just left it and go, hey, you know, we're just going to do our best and we're going to try and do all these things, right? So having a target really focuses the mind on what you should and shouldn't be doing. And that is actually what really good salespeople are very good at. They know these certain activities generate the outcome that we are after as a company and add value to the customer. How do I best use the resources that are available to me to do that? And how do I either dump, delegate, or do later the things that aren't adding value?
So we've got a few minutes left. And one thing I want to, I love to leave these sessions when we give folks, you know, very tactical, here's the next few steps that I would take. And, you know, I think we've got a bunch of really good, like, strategic discussion up to this point. What's been interesting is on the back of our kind of strategic discussions that a lot of times we've been having. We've been getting a bunch of like really tactical questions, one question around like, should we pull commission if an account churns within X period of time? And I don't know if we'll have time to get into those, but what I'd love to hear from both Dave and Rav as we kind of like start kind of coming to the end is just like, okay, great. I see this all resonates with me. I come out of this and I say, yep, I'm living in an everything department. So what would be the first, let's just say like 2-3 tactical steps that you would take in order to start? Because this is not something you're going to solve overnight. But like, what are the first kind of 2 or 3 tactical steps that you would think about taking in order to make an improvement here?
Well, I have taken the liberty of flicking ahead to the last slide, which is the checklist. These all correlate to the problems. For me, what I would do on a super tactical level, because I think they would add a lot of value and they're probably the ones you can get down quickest. Data and signals. Can I get the data that I need, whether that's product usage, telemetry, ticket data, whatever it is? Can I go out and buy ClientSuccess and plug in everything I need? Because that will actually help me to sort out some of the noise. I think that's probably what I would do. And the second one is integration into the sales motion. So even if there is no formalized agreement to do that, there is nothing stopping you looking at the pipeline and going proactively and reaching out to people going, well, if that closes, that's going to come to me. So I'm going to actually do some discovery now and see if I can actually get an introduction to the customer at the right point, etc. So I would probably double down on there in parallel to maybe working with the team and your leadership on coming up with that pitch, because I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think that underpins all of it. Dave, over to you. What's your tips?
I think all of these are awesome. And again, I would highly recommend write out your mission, your charter, whatever you want to call it, your why statement, to make sure that and evangelize that over and over again, internally and externally. The second tactical thing that I'd recommend is going through what I call a time and motion analysis with your CSMs. And that means just ask them for 2 weeks or even 1 week to keep track of everything they do on a 15-minute increment, and then go through each of those and bucket them out and actually put data to their time. Because the best way to persuade or to drive change is through data-driven insights. And so once you do that, you come back and you say, hey, look at our CSM. They're spending 40% of their time answering support tickets. We've got an issue. Let's try to bring that down over the next quarter to 20% or whatever. Or look how much time our customer success team is chasing down bad invoices or collections. That's a very specific way. If you find that you already are an everything department, to work your way out of that is first surface the data that shows that you are, and then work with your peers to drive that time in the what I would call non-value added activities down. That's such a more on value added activities.
That's such a great piece of advice, Dave, and I can attest to having done a similar approach in several companies that I've worked in, where a practical example is you've got sales leaders going, I need your guys on deals, right? We have to run these pilots, we have to run these POCs. And then if you actually spend a couple of quarters quantifying hours spent on pilots versus how many of those closed versus hours they spent with customers and how many of those grew, you could go, I went back to leadership and say, well, for 483 hours on pilots, we secured $15,000 new in revenue. But for 289 hours focused on working with customers, we drove 1.6 million in incremental ARR. Exactly. Where would you like me to spend my time?
And the data tells the story really easy. Yeah. So I'd do that if you feel like.
Yeah, and in that example, it also led the sales team to realize we have a gap in our process. We don't define criteria for pilots, minimum spend, etc. So they went off and we surfaced a problem for them too. So time and motion study is a great idea, Dave. Really good, super practical.
One thing I'm excited to see is this recent trend of customer success ops. I feel like that's a relatively new concept in the customer success world. We've had sales ops, we've had marketing ops, we've had kind of coming back to your earlier slide, we've had these really established teams and departments, and they've kind of had operational functions to them. And like that time and motion study is, I think, fairly common at with other departments. And I think with, more and more investments in customer success operational roles, you're going to start to see more of this type of data and analysis into where are we spending our time? Because right now, if you're not tracking where you're spending your time, it turns out, you can spend your time on 100 different things, and that's how you end up at the end of the conveyor belt without actually, driving any true value to the business. So I think that's a fascinating.
It's such a spot on point. I think the ops thing, I think two roles actually that I'm excited to see emerge. One is the CS ops, and the other one is CS content. Because if you deconstruct what a lot of time CSM spend, it's on building slideware and building one pages, because they don't actually have access to, the only people who could do content is marketing, and they're focused on building content for top of funnel. So I think those two roles definitely are excited to see more and more of those. And I think that comes back to, we were talking about science and art. People are starting to understand what's the science bits of CS, the 60, 70% that I need to build in each company.
We have just a couple minutes left. I don't want to shortchange the end of it. We literally probably have dozens of questions that we don't have time to get to. Maybe what we do is I take some of these questions and we kind of do a follow-up blog post or
send me a big Google Doc, Mark. I'll try and knock them off in the Google Doc.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But I guess I just want to wrap up and just say thank you, Rav. I think this has been a fascinating discussion.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
And maybe just I'd love to hear what are any final words that you want to share before we wrap things up, both from Rav and Dave.
Well, Dave, after you.
Yeah, thanks. Just a pleasure to be here with Rav. The insights. I love this concept that he's coined the everything department, because it really is a challenge. I've seen this in startups. I've seen this in global companies. I don't think it differentiates between the two. And I think there's some great insights here, but start with knowing who you are and communicate that out. So excited to be here. Thanks, Rav. I love the insights. Always love to share the stage or the Zoom with you, and appreciate the insights you've shared.
Thank you. And what is parting thought for me is, it's very hard being at the end of that production line, and sometimes you don't feel particularly appreciated, or it can be very demotivating, especially in these very trying times that we're all working in. What I just suggest is, if you all remember that the most successful enterprise software company in the world, Salesforce, 73% of their revenue comes from their existing customers. And that's why you are important, because if you want to be Salesforce, you can't do it without CS. So that's my parting words of hopefully encouragement to you, is there is no successful software company that makes its revenue by selling the majority to new business. It's always from your existing customers.
Awesome. Maybe Rav, if you put up your final slide there, just so if people want to interact with you, people want to engage with you. I think you had your final slide was.
Oh, bear with me, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah. So if anybody's keen on reading the article that inspired today's webinar, you'll see the link there. It was commissioned by Scottish Equity Partners, who are a tremendously successful and very innovative growth equity firm. You can follow me on Medium. I write about this and other topics, and always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn or over Twitter. But thanks everyone for such great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I'm sure Dave will figure out a way of getting everyone answers. But thanks again. It's been really great fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. We'll leave it there.